Steam has thousands of games. A lot of these are great projects that you can sink your teeth into and spend hundreds of hours losing yourself in the bounds of their worlds. But on the other side are projects that are so bad that they make you regret the fact that you bought them and even spent your time trying them out. Scams, cash grabs, even just poorly optimized projects. But if you want the real gems beneath the garbage, you're going to have to wade through the muck, because that other side isn't all bad. Sometimes a diamond can be found here or there. That's what I'm here for. Today, I'm going to be taking another look at 10 of the worst reviewed games on Steam. I chose different projects from among the mixed, negative, and overwhelmingly negatives. If you've seen this series before, then you already know that I try to give each game on this list a fair shake. I attempt to see both the good and the bad with each title. My intention is not just to trash all of these poorly received games, but to see where they failed and maybe where they succeed. If you enjoy this video, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, as it really helps me out. It's me, your favorite son, and today I'd like to once again talk about bad games. Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Rita's Rewind is a game developed and published by Digital Eclipse. It was released on December 10th, 2024, and currently has mixed reviews on Steam, with 462 total reviews, 59% of those being positive. Digital Eclipse are mostly known these days for publishing ports of other games or for making tie-ins with other IP. Rita's Rewind is a classic beat-em-up style game focused on the Power Rangers universe. The game boasts an original storyline that meshes together a lot of different Power Rangers lore and characters. I'm not a Power Rangers fan, so I won't be able to tell you whether this game is exactly faithful to the Power Rangers franchise, but I can tell you whether this game is good or not, which is more of a complicated question to answer. The game sees us taking over one of 5 different playable Rangers: the Red Ranger, Blue Ranger, Yellow Ranger, Pink Ranger, and the Black Ranger. We jump into the story as the Rangers are fighting against a robotic version of Rita, a villain that the Rangers have faced off against many times in the past. This is happening during the year 2023, but when Robo-Rita escapes through a portal to 1993, the Rangers chase her back into the past. The game is split up into chapters, each comprised of a few levels. In each level, we battle our way through groups of enemies along the streets or paths until we eventually fight a boss. We have a few moves at our disposal to deal with the ne'er-do-wells. Pressing the X button will allow us to attack the enemy in front of us, and hitting a few times in a row will let us pull off a combo that eventually launches the enemy forward. Pressing either the forward or backward button twice will allow us to dash in that direction, and chaining it with an attack will see our Ranger launching forward in a dash kick. Using up and the attack button will execute a rising attack, as hitting X when in the air will launch a downward smash. B is our dodge button, and if timed correctly will allow us to move out of the way of incoming attacks. Attacks and dodges will fill the super bar right beneath our health meter. When this is full, pressing the Y button will pull off a super move that is special for each character. We have some other moves like diagonal attacks and different combos that we can pull off, but for the most part, this is our moveset. The game will pit us against a variety of different enemies that get more advanced as we move through the game's chapters. The simple grunt enemies wear white suits, stronger enemies that wield rocks are clad in purple, blue enemies wield drills and rush across the battlefield, and even birds will attack us from the sky. And for the most part, Rita's Rewind is just fine. It's a decent throwback to the beat-em-up games of the past. It captures a similar level of nostalgia and represents a good homage to that genre. It captures some of the nostalgia surrounding this series by setting it in that time period and trying to represent it accurately. but the game just doesn't offer enough to justify playing it. The moveset that we're given isn't very complicated, so there isn't that much variety in combat. Enemy variety is not that large either, generally offering us the same course of goons, but just with slightly different moves. The bosses do present a good difference from each other, each having their own distinct abilities and challenges. The first boss that we go up against, Goldar, summons enemies, pulls off AoE attacks, and launches fireballs our way. The Bones boss is fought over the course of the level, and as we defeat him, his limbs disappear until he's just a flying head that shoots projectiles at us. But because the moveset isn't very complicated, it just doesn't give us enough to do within these battles. There's a lot of ways that we get fought, but not a lot of ways to fight back. And it feels like the best comparison for Rita's Rewind is a game that came out in 2022 called Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: Shredder's Revenge. Both games are classic beat-em-ups inspired by very similar games. They are both based on older franchises, but Shredder's Revenge is the much better game overall. First of all, the game gives us access to much better combos and moves. This allows a game to have a much higher skill ceiling and gives the player something to work towards, which is having more skill at the game. It feels like there's somewhere to move up. Rita's Rewind just doesn't really have that. It feels like you can gather most of its knowledge in the first hour or so. Also, Shredder's Revenge just has a lot more to it. It has more characters, more collectibles, more stuff to do in general. It just feels like you're getting more from this package. I also just think that the game looks better. The pixel art here is a lot more crisp, the colors are more vibrant, and while Rita's Rewind might generally have the advantage of larger scale backgrounds with a bit more detail, Shredder's Revenge has the aesthetic advantage overall. I will say that Rita's Rewind does have one advantage in these really cool on-rail shooting sequences. Every few levels, we will get to play a sequence where we transform into one of the Zords. We'll run along a path and have to shoot at enemies and obstacles in our way. Sometimes this ends with a small sequence where we shoot at Rita's complex machinery, but other times it ends in a first-person sequence where we pilot the Megazord and battle bosses face to face. And honestly, there's no better way to say it than, this is just so cool. I'm not even a fan of Power Rangers, but this feels like something that fans of this series would love. And it's hard to not at least like Rita's Rewind because of these parts. The boss battles and the shooting sequences are all great action set pieces, but the combat that's a bit oversimplified is probably a large part of why this game is mixed rather than positive. It also just lacks a lot of the features of games that draw on similar things like Shredder's Revenge. The game also had a ton of issues with controls on launch. This review states it pretty clearly. This game feels unfinished and looks like it has made to take money from fans. Slow movement, controls with delay, beat up with delay, no option for keyboard? Waste of time. Reviewers all noted that the combat and controls were all incredibly clunky, and luckily the developers fixed most of this with a post-launch patch, so the game actually does feel pretty good to play at this point. I would say that Rita's Rewind is an alright game, and if you really love beat-em-ups, or if you really love Power Rangers, then I think you'll get something out of this, but everything that this game does, Shredder's Revenge does better, and for $10 less, by the way. This game is $35, while TMNT is only $25. The basic combat and overall lack of combos make that price point just a bit too steep for what Rita's Rewind offers if you aren't a massive fan of the Power Rangers franchise. Shout out to War Thunder for being the sponsor of this video. War Thunder happens to be the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made, and you can get it right now for free on PC, console, and mobile devices. War Thunder is advanced not only because of its in-depth customization, but also because of its impressive damage X-ray mode. Anytime your vehicle or an enemy vehicle is destroyed, War Thunder will show you exactly what happened. You'll see where the shell hit, what components were damaged, and what led to your vehicle's destruction. You truly can't find this level of detail anywhere else. War Thunder has over 2,500 tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships to choose from. Biplanes, armored cars of the 1920s, and even fighter jets and modern battle tanks of the current era. This is probably my favorite part of the game, just how many options there are. Each player can create a unique loadout that leads to a ton of variety in battles. And with the all-new mobile version of the game on iOS and Android, you can let the battlefield follow you wherever you go. Play War Thunder for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, or mobile devices by using my links in the description below or the pinned comment. New and returning players on PC and consoles that haven't played in the past 6 months will also receive a massive bonus pack across all platforms that includes premium vehicles, the exclusive vehicle decorator, Eagle of Valor, 100,000 Silver Lions, and 7 days of premium account. It's available for a limited time only, so be quick. Now back to the video. Cube World is a game developed and published by Peak Roma. It was released on September 30th, 2019, and currently has mixed reviews on Steam, with 9,718 total reviews, 43% of those being positive. Cube World is a game that has a long history, or rather, lack thereof. The game was originally released in 2011, with its alpha version being sold on its website. People really enjoyed this version of the game, and it quickly became one of the most anticipated releases of its genre. This release wouldn't come until 2019 though, and with very infrequent updates from the developer, it would cause the game to lose a lot of the steam that it once had. Coupled with the fact that the full release contained a ton of changes that fans did not agree with, people excited for the full game were not happy. Cube World may look kind of like Minecraft, but it is in fact not Minecraft. Cube World is an open world RPG that allows the player to pick from 4 different classes: travel the world, explore new regions, defeat monsters, and level up. Starting out, you create a character and pick a class. The 4 classes are Mage, Ranger, Rogue, and Warrior. I played 2 different classes for this video, Ranger and Warrior specifically. I'll say that I had a lot more fun with the Warrior class, but I think that's mostly because it requires a lot less from the player. When you create a character, Cube World spawns you near a shrine and a town. Shrines are respawn points and fast travel markers. If you die, then you'll come back to life at this point. But outside of the small controls list at the bottom left-hand side of the screen, Cube World gives you no direction. It lets the players figure things out for themselves, and that's not something that I'm directly opposed to. Allowing the player to explore alone without the assistance of the game itself can lead to a heightened sense of satisfaction. Because the player is allowed to achieve things on their own, they feel as if they made it happen rather than the game letting it happen. But what we're actually supposed to do on startup in Cube World is head to the nearest town and talk to people. These people will give us quests. They are more landmarks rather than quests because a small marker is placed on our map where we might find particularly difficult monsters to defeat or some sort of great treasure. These landmarks are all ranked by stars and colors, with 1 white star being the most simple to complete and 5 yellow stars being the most difficult. Cube World doesn't have any sort of experience system. You don't get experience for killing enemies, which then levels you up. You have to find gear and equip it to level up your character. It wasn't always this way. Back in the alpha release of Cube World, there actually was a leveling system and you could kill enemies to get experience. So this means that we have to get markers from the local town and then head to the low difficulty markers and complete the objectives there, hopefully getting some better gear and moving on. Well, the enemies in Cube World follow the same ranking system as well. You'll run into a lot of enemies that are far higher level than you and way too strong for you to take on right at the beginning of the game. This means that you're dodging mobs all the way to your objective. So what's the problem? Why is this game controversial in the first place? Well, first of all, the progression is just far too slow. First of all, it takes forever to figure the game out on your own. This is a choice that I ultimately understand, but if you want people to figure things out on their own, then it comes with a pretty heavy price you have to pay, and that's having good game design. Cube World is procedurally generated, so a lot of this won't be specifically controlled by the developer. It can be influenced, but for the most part, it won't be fine-tuned. I don't have a problem with procedurally generated games, I just think that style probably doesn't fit in with a game that has you figuring everything out on your own. The other thing is just that gear takes forever to get. You spend most of your time walking from place to place just to attempt a quest at a location, and maybe it doesn't drop any great gear. Maybe your reward is just a very slight upgrade that doesn't make that much of a difference. Again, long travel times, player-led exploration, these things are all fine as concepts, but they just don't really fit here. You can't have it both ways. You can get a hang glider pretty early on, which is fun to use and does speed up travel time a little bit, but it can't fix the progression system overall. The best thing I can really say about this game is that it looks nice. The design is pretty, it's a good game to look at, but it's just generally very boring to play. It probably wouldn't be like that if it had the original leveling system, but with that removed, you get a very slow project with not a lot of reward at the end of the tunnel. Apparently, the developer is working on a new version of the game called Cube World Omega, which will bring back the old systems that the fans enjoyed and will take the game to a new engine. That might be something for fans of the alpha version to look forward to, but I honestly just don't think that Cube World is really worth the time that it requires from you. Detective the Motel is a game developed by K148 Game Studio and was published by Jandusoft. It was released on December 5th, 2024 and has mostly negative reviews on Steam, with 30% of the reviews being positive. Detective puts us in the shoes of an investigator at the center of a murder in a motel. This is the third game in the Detective series by K148. Each game is a very short first-person game that requires the player to investigate a crime scene and report all of the details of the crime to finish it off. Something I really enjoyed about this game was that it requires that you have a notebook and pencil nearby to take notes. The game actively encourages this, and it's one of my favorite things in the game. It reminds me of older games that would require you to write down phrases and passcodes, and it's something that I don't think modern games do enough of. It also helps that it's a detective game, and writing down things in a notepad just feels like it fits. The game gives us a PDA with 6 pictures. We have to match these pictures to names by finding small details in the motel. Some of these people were also staying at the motel, so we have to attach their names to rooms. And finally, we have to answer what time the crime happened, what day it happened, who was killed, and who the murderer was. This is done by moving through the motel and investigating all of the rooms. Each of these rooms tells a little story about the person who was staying there, like how Irene Miller was a book author who had recently seen some fame with her latest release. She was in a lot of debt and getting evicted though, which is why she was staying here at all. It also turns out that she's been cavorting with one of the other tenants, a man named Carlos. We find out that Carlos is actually siphoning money from Irene, not by thievery, but just by borrowing money from her a lot. He's actually seeing this woman named Ivy, who's also staying in the motel. The real story here is that Ivy killed a woman named Anna, who has had a history with mental health problems. There's also another guy staying here that's a doomsday prepper with a bunch of guns. I'm not sure why a doomsday prepper would be staying in a motel, but okay. The story is actually kind of okay, and it had me hooked most of the way through, but that doesn't mean that Detective the Motel is a good game, or frankly, an even passable one. First of all, the fact that we have to answer who was killed on the PDA is just insane to me. If our character is a detective, wouldn't we have that information? Are we just a freelance detective or a citizen vigilante or something? I'm not sure what the answer is, but it doesn't really make sense. Even if we were investigating the crime without police knowledge, you would think that our character would have gotten some information before going about this. It's really just a way for the game to throw red herrings our way and make us think that other people died when they didn't. The second thing that absolutely ruins this game is just how poorly translated everything is. There's a note in the meeting room, I guess because this motel has community meetings for some reason. It says, "People leave. Many people have been leaving the motel for a while. Currently, there are only 5 people left living here continuously. This makes maintenance very difficult. For now, we can survive thanks to people who rent rooms to spend the night, but fewer and fewer people come." Like, first of all, why does less people living here mean maintenance is more difficult? Wouldn't that make maintenance easier? Also, what is this motel? Why do they expect people to live here forever? Like, it isn't an apartment complex, it's a motel. This newspaper article says, "Irene Miller has become the most popular writer of the moment with her book called Light. She has managed to conquer the bestseller category in the second week of release, going from being an anonymous writer to being the most sought-after writer. Irene comes from a small town in the north of the country. She describes herself as a fighter and passionate person. In his book, we will learn part of the history of humanity through short stories. These stories are focused on positivism." Everything just feels off because the words are just one typo away from falling apart entirely. There's actually a few voice lines in the game because we can listen to voice messages on cell phones that we find in the rooms.
"Hey Helen, I'm worried. Hello Irene, what's going on? I have a pretty strange neighbor. He's one of those guys obsessed with the end of the world. Today I think he took a photo of me from his car."
These also make zero sense because who is using voice messages like this? The game also constantly forgets who is the sender and who is the receiver when it lists text messages, because Carlos's phone has text messages to someone who seems to be a drug dealer or at least an unsavory character he's buying stuff from. But it looks like the unknown number is telling him to stop coming around the motel and scaring people. These little details shouldn't matter, but they really do when you're playing a game that's so focused on details. The whole point of the game is details, tracing back these relationships, figuring out the truth, uncovering what actually happened here. You can't exactly do that if you can't trust that the game is giving you accurate information. Detective the Motel has something interesting here, and I really like the idea of just a simple experience where you visit a crime scene, collect evidence, and then answer questions at the end. That's something I can totally get behind, but the translation issues and little details throw the whole game off for me. If they could take these shorter games and make a bigger project with 5 to 10 cases wrapped into one and iron out the finer points, I think it would be something I'd actually enjoy. Idle Ultimate is a game developed by Pelmany Games. It was released on June 27th, 2023, and currently has mostly negative review status on Steam, with 13 total reviews, 23% of those being positive. It wouldn't be one of these videos if I didn't talk about an idle game. Idle Ultimate is basically the distillation of all of the elements that make up an idle game in their most basic form. The game has everything that you would find in your average incremental game, but without any of the flair, without any of the pomp. It's just numbers. This is reflected in the basic design of the game, the flat black text of a white screen. I turned dark mode on after a few minutes of playing the game, so it's actually black text on a white screen, but you get my point. All of the currency in the game is originally just listed as basic keyboard symbols: equal sign, hyphen, colon, period, and a blank space. This can be changed in the menu because it is kind of a pain to deal with, but the concept is still there. And it's clear that a lot of this is intentional. I would suspect this was the point behind the game, to make an incremental game that almost reflects on the concept of incremental games as you play it. I would argue that other games do this better. Universal Paperclips is probably the best example of this concept, but let's dive into what Idle Ultimate has to offer. Idle games are all about generating bigger numbers and making income. At the beginning of the game, the only real way that we generate income is through generators. Each generator has 4 stats: power, speed, critical, and multiplier. The power determines how much income we generate. Speed determines how fast it is generated. Critical determines the chance to multiply the income generated, and the multiplier determines by how much the critical will multiply. We can increase each of these stats by upgrading them. To unlock the next generator, we have to get the first generator to a certain level. Then to unlock the third one, we have to get the second one to a certain level, so on and so forth. There are many tabs at the top of the screen which allow us to access the different income sources that the game offers us. The multipliers tab will allow us to use another currency, MP, to reveal these blocks on the screen. The blocks will add multiplier to any of the 4 generator stats, increasing its specific output. The investments tab will allow us to invest a certain portion of our income into something. Investing will give us a fixed income rate which starts at 1%. This investment returns every 30 minutes, far less complicated than real investing. The Converter tab will allow us to convert different currencies to other currencies. The Rewards tab generates certain currencies every few minutes, which we can collect with a click. The Bets tab allows us to effectively gamble by betting a certain amount of our current money and hoping for a return. And the Prestige tab allows us to invest prestige points, which upgrades our stats for future runs of the game. Now, all of these things are pretty standard fare for an idle game. Prestige mechanics, investing, multipliers, generators, etc. And I actually don't mind this basic system at all. There's enough to interact with here to keep someone engaged for a while. With incremental games, you need various sources of engagement to keep the player entertained. You can have the game be just pure idle, but that's not going to keep people coming back all the time. There needs to be some sort of reward. The loop is invest, reward, so on and so forth. But Idle Ultimate is just far too slow to ever really see that reward. The Prestige and Generator system are 2 parts of the problem. By default, all of the generators max out at level 100, meaning that you can't level them any higher without increasing the max generator level stat in the Prestige screen. This quickly becomes a problem because the level 7 generator requires level 120 on the previous one to unlock it. This means that we need at least 4 prestige points to upgrade the maximum level and eventually unlock that generator on our second run. Getting 4 prestige points isn't a huge problem, as we get them every hour or so from the rewards screen. The problem comes from the fact that the game basically stops once we've hit the max level on all the generators and can't unlock the next one. From this point forward, we basically have to prestige because we can't upgrade anything further except for our multiplier page. So we then end up relying far too much on the rewards screen. The rewards screen gives us different currencies after a certain amount of time. For some currencies, it's 1 hour. For some, it's 30 minutes. All of the currencies it gives out are fixed to 1, except for money. For this currency, it just doubles what we currently have. This means that we rely on this screen far too often to double our money. This ends up generating way more income than our actual generators. At a certain point, the game just becomes about sitting in this screen and waiting for the timer to tick down so we can double our money and buy what we want. It's just a really slow game overall, and after my first prestige, I just didn't see nearly enough increase in my income to warrant playing anymore. As I've said before, incremental games heavily rely on balance to create a rewarding system. You are riding a very fine line because you don't want things to move too fast because then they won't be satisfying, but you don't want them to move too slow because then they won't be rewarding. You have to find that middle ground that keeps a player engaged and wanting to come back to see what rewards they've reaped. Idle Ultimate just falls too far on one side of that balance to be worth it in the end. Also, the text is incredibly small and can't be scaled up whatsoever. It hurts my eyes to play this game. Dauntless is a game developed and published by Phoenix Labs and was released originally on September 26th, 2019, and then on Steam on December 5th, 2024. The game currently has overwhelmingly negative review status on Steam with 1,569 total reviews, 16% of those being positive. Phoenix Labs was founded in 2014 by ex-Riot Games developers. Their only other game has been Fae Farm, which released after Dauntless in 2023. I actually remember playing Dauntless when it came out. I'm not a huge fan of these Monster Hunter games, but I had some free time and I remember checking it out for a little bit. It was fine, and at the time it was pretty popular. I maybe played it for 20 hours and then forgot about it until this very video. Dauntless is a Monster Hunter game at its core. The game centers around hunting monsters, gathering items from those monsters, and using those items to upgrade your weapons, gear, and abilities. This is the core loop of the game and is basically everything that will carry us through Dauntless. It prioritizes large monster boss-like battles over everything else. Weapons are also a core part of Dauntless because each weapon has distinct combos, and the weapon that we choose will determine how we play. Guns and other ranged weapons will have drastically different playstyles from something like the axe, for example. Some weapons make you much slower, but you might do far higher damage, and other weapons make you faster, but you trade hits for that speed. The axe that I used for most of my playtime had a basic combo, which would give me a few big damaging hits, and a right-click combo, which was a bit quicker, a charge attack, which did a lot of stagger damage to the boss, and a charge-up ability, which increased my speed for a short period of time. In Dauntless, you travel to different areas which are generally a bit open and have a couple different monster types. You run around that area seeking out these monsters, you defeat them, and then when you've had enough, you head back to the main hub area called Ramsgate. Here you can turn in quests, talk to a variety of different NPCs, upgrade weapons, gear, and interact with the game's Hunt Pass system. In my opinion, there are a lot of problems with this game. First of all, I hate the way Dauntless looks. I remember having this problem with the game when I first played it. The UI is super bland. I'm sure that it has something to do with the coloring of the boxes, but it just looks so generic. Nothing really stands out. Everything looks flat. Even the boss character images at the top of the screen kind of look like something pulled from a mid-2000s browser game, and not in the good way. Of course, the character designs have the cartoony Fortnite style, and listen, I don't expect too much from this game because it is free after all, but still, the aesthetic design is just not my style. Second of all, the game is just so grindy. It certainly isn't the type of game I'm going out of my way to play, but I can see why people spend so much time on this genre. It can be an addicting loop to run out killing these enemies until you get an upgrade, but Dauntless just does it in such a bland way. You end up killing enemies over and over because you want their resources. Their resources are required to craft their gear, and that gear can only be upgraded if you keep killing them. It just gets so old so fast, and some of the later level enemies did get more interesting, but it was never something that I felt I wanted to put in the effort to learn. You also just spend so much time in town getting crafting done. Basic weapons are upgraded by this currency called Aetheryte. The Aetheryte will give your weapon a certain amount of experience, and you can use multiple on the weapon to increase its level. You can do a similar thing with armor, feeding the crafting vendor resources and currency to upgrade it, but you also have to turn all your quests in, and sometimes those quests give Aetheryte, and then you need to head back to the vendor to upgrade your stuff again, and then you have to check in with the Hunt Pass guy, and then you have to check your bounties and accept those, and interact with the Slayer Pass system. It's just so much shit to interact with, and not in a good way. These systems don't engage you because they're also spread out that it pulls the meaning away from any of these rewards. They don't feel substantial because there's simply so much of them. That's why this game pulls you in at the beginning, because it's instantly rewarding, but that turns into diminishing returns pretty quickly. The game is also monetized to hell. There's loot boxes you can buy from the store. You can really buy anything you want from the store, and there's a lot to buy. Obviously, this is how the game makes money. It's battle pass and it's microtransactions, but it's a bit overkill. Part of the negative review score from the game comes from its recent Awakening update. The game was basically overhauled and erased a lot of people's progression, only to take away a lot of features like reducing the amount of weapons available and changing the progression systems in the game. Honestly, I can't put it much better than this Steam review does. Only reason played this game was the prestige system. Why remove it? I don't care about progress loss, rather that level 20 and reset system, you Why change Omnicell system? Leveling should have more battle pass and skins and expansion pack for cash, rather this garbage stuff. Plus UI is kinda boring like Warframe and ugly to look at. I'm a cheapskate, but only for this game. I bought battle pass and Fortnite, but you guy had to the whole leveling system and sell stuff. Why? Sadness game is not fun to play now. Fans of the game were pretty upset about this because the previous update wasn't that well received either. Phoenix Labs was actually acquired by a company called Garena in 2020 and then regained its independence in 2023, but it was later reported that they were bought out by a blockchain company in that same year. A ton of people were laid off from 2023 to 2024, so I can imagine part of this update was about reducing the amount of balancing that the company would have to do to support the game in the future. That's just speculation on my part though, with only a cursory understanding of this situation. Regardless, I think Dauntless did have a good thing going at some point. I remember it being pretty popular back when I played it, and I think the most recent update seems to go against everyone that was still even interested in their game. To be honest, Dauntless isn't really even my type of game to begin with, but I can't really find anything redeemable here outside of the basic combat being an alright time for an hour or two. Putting any serious time or money into this game at this point probably isn't worth it. The Legend of Candlewind: Nights and Candles is a game developed by Atmosphere Entertainment Studios. It was released on February 12th, 2015 and currently has a negative review status on Steam with 34 total reviews, 2% of them being positive. Candlewind is a first-person party dungeon crawler game. It reminds me of classic games like Eye of the Beholder, and I'm sure that it took inspiration from games like that. The story takes place at the foot of the Frost Mountains, where a band of adventurers have learned of a nearby band of rogues. These thieves have been plaguing the Blackwood Forest for quite some time, and our adventurers are planning to take them on, to rid the townsfolk of their scheming and treachery. This is where the game begins, in a dungeon, as our party enters and begins to wage war on this group. In Candlewind, we use the arrow keys to move forward or turn our party's orientation in the dungeon. Each movement we make will decrease our character's hunger meter, and if this falls to 0, then we start to lose HP. This reflects the group's supplies and how long they can survive in the dungeon. Walking around the dungeon, we can find secret rooms, chests full of loot, and of course, enemies. Candlewind treats battle just like the classic systems in this genre did. The game follows a turn-based system. We fight one enemy at a time, but each character in our party can take one action against that enemy per turn. We start out with 4 characters. The 2 in the front or at the top of the screen seem to be some sort of melee class. The bottom right character is an archer, and the bottom left character is a mage. The melee classes can attack when the enemy is in melee range. The archer class can shoot arrows from any distance, and the mage can cast healing or damage spells. Each character has its own stats, level, gear, and inventory. Finding items throughout the dungeon means that we need to determine which character is going to carry it or which character will equip it. Candlewind has problems, and most of its problems are just lack of content. First of all, these games usually have character customization. They generally allow you to pick your party, create characters with different classes, and craft a group yourself. Candlewind doesn't allow you to do this. The 4 characters in your group at the beginning are predetermined by the game. This honestly makes Candlewind feel like a crafted short scenario dungeon crawler rather than an actual RPG. It's a crafted situation rather than one that the character is allowed to create. The game is also incredibly poorly balanced. At a certain point in the game, we will reach a group of enemies that are all made up of the same fodder we've been fighting, except for the final enemy. The last enemy in the group is a shaman, and the first time that we go up against this thing, we just get brutally wiped. The thing runs over our entire group and we have to load back in. To even get past this thing, we have to just grind. You can do this by going into the dungeon and clicking the Wait for Monsters button. A monster will appear in front of you and you can just kill the these things over and over, but it takes so long to get any sort of considerable leveling done. It moves really slow, and this sort of grinding feels necessary rather than something that you have the option to do. You must do this to progress. As soon as I started playing Candlewind, I was immediately reminded of a game called Legend of Grimrock. I played this game a ton when I first got a computer. It came out in 2012, and it didn't require the highest specs to run it, so it was perfect for me. But Grimrock is a very similar game in that it takes from the same inspirations that Candlewind seems to. But Grimrock has a ton more content, more enemies, it's far longer, it has more depth in systems, more customization. It feels like it knew the soul of this genre and tried to capture that. Candlewind does seem like it was a first effort, a small attempt at creating something like Grimrock, or at least something in this genre, but it honestly just wasn't a great attempt. It's too short, it's not well balanced, it feels curated rather than something that allows the player to create their own experience, and its systems just aren't that robust to warrant grinding for hours to continue. Confrontation is a game developed by Cyanide Studio and published by Focus Home Interactive. The game was released on April 4th, 2012, and currently has mostly negative review status on Steam, with 95 total reviews, 34% of those being positive. Cyanide is actually known for developing the popular series of fantasy sports games, Blood Bowl. They also developed Vampire the Masquerade Swansong as their branch called Big Bad Wolf. Confrontation is a pretty basic party-based action RPG. It almost feels like an RTS at the beginning, and that was kind of how I viewed it for the first hour or so, but it's not that it's an RTS, it's just an ARPG without much to do. Our party is tasked with seeking out the Macacites, a group of combat clones that must be exterminated. We are sent into the Ivory Dunes to look for a stronghold where they are being created, and this is where Confrontation's story begins. This means heading through the surrounding areas, defeating the hybrid amalgamations nearby, and looking for the stronghold where these clones are made. Combat allows us to take control of 4 characters at once. Each of these characters have their own class, set of skills, and stats. Certain skills will heal the party, others will stun enemies, some will buff your allies. I was actually pretty happy with the variety in skills here. Each character does feel distinct, and it feels like they fulfill their role quite well in the party. I really wasn't a fan of the lack of gear in this game though. There is sort of a gear system involved, but it isn't much. We can find equipment stores around the different maps, and these stores will give us armor points or weapon points. These points can then be used to pick one of the 2 options on a tree. You really just get 2 choices on the various points of the tree, that's it. You obviously get a bit more variety when it comes to which skills you choose to upgrade or where you choose to put your stat points. The combat also has huge issues. The first issue is that it's just far too simple. The game lets you know pretty early on that you can pause to queue different skills while in combat. This is essential to planning out your movements in battle, but this means that the game just turns into pause, select the skills that you want to use, wait for your characters to use them, and then pause again while you choose the next skills. This is fine in some games, but this game just doesn't really feel like it should have these systems. Its design makes it seem like it should move a bit faster than it actually does. It just ends up being really slow and unrewarding in the end. Confrontation is also just super clunky to interface with. Your whole party often can't fit through doorways, so they get stuck pretty often. Sometimes your party members just won't be able to use the skills you want them to, and you just can't figure out why. This makes you trust the entire system less because you aren't sure when and where you can pull off tactical commands. I will give the game some credit because in the moments when I accidentally pulled 2 packs of mobs, this did actually feel intense. Surviving and getting a win really felt like I had overcome something, and those were the only moments that the game really made me feel like I was achieving something that it was going for. The moments that I had to actually plan out my abilities and use skills to stun enemies felt good, but it was mostly unintentional. Even for the time, Confrontation just doesn't really feel like it has much going for it. The story isn't very strong, it's weak and quite sparse, the combat is not engaging and feels pretty repetitive, and trying to engage with the game can just be frustrating. There's a few bright moments here and there, but dealing with the rest really isn't worth getting to those small bright spots. Crimson Angel is a game developed by Game Hollywood Games and was released on July 14th, 2024. It currently has negative review status on Steam with 14 total reviews, 14% of those being positive. Game Hollywood Games released 4 games in 2024, 3 games in 2023, and have 1 game already released this year. All of their games are pretty similar in style and genre. Most of them are either negatively reviewed or mixed. I honestly have no fucking clue where to begin with this game. I started it up and the game asked me to pick a name, but as I clicked to start typing, it just started the game and it looked like this. Suddenly I was just attacking, and within seconds I was level 8 and had 100 menus in front of me just constantly popping up. This doesn't stop, by the way. This is just how the whole game is. Crimson Angel can be described pretty succinctly as those meme game advertisements, but like the real version of it. There are so many mechanics in this game, it makes my head spin. Basically, Crimson Angel is an idle game where your character auto-attacks any enemies in front of it. I couldn't exactly tell you what the point of this game is, or exactly what we're supposed to do, to be honest, but as soon as I started the game up, my goal was to try and decipher it, to be able to explain its mechanics. I unfortunately don't think that's possible because nothing is ever explained in this game, and I couldn't figure any of it out. I think the goal is to get your BR, which I assume stands for battle rank, up. This seems to effectively be your damage score or level in the game. This can be increased in all manner of ways: equipment, goddesses, partners. Like I said before, there's 100 different mechanics in this game. There's timed events that are going on that send you into battle one boss. There's guilds that you can rank up and get currency from to buy different chests. There's all sorts of loot boxes. There's login events for playing the game every day. There's weapon and armor crafting mechanics to create gear from low-level stuff that you've dismantled. There's boss rushes. There's tiers of bosses. There's crafting for companions. There's waifu gacha mechanics. There's skill upgrading. There's a rebirth system that upgrades your character. This game is literally insane. Honestly, the only way to really play this game is to click on the buttons that have red circles on them noting something new, and then trying to interact with that mechanic. That's really it. You just do that over and over. Sometimes you get upgrades, sometimes you have to kill a boss, sometimes you level up, sometimes you make some sort of advancement, but it's all pointless. I'm not even entirely sure what genre this game falls into. I could really only call it a mobile game. And I've honestly never really played one of these games before, but this is literally just jingling keys in front of a baby. It's one of those child sensory videos on YouTube. It's the Fisher Price of video games. You'd get the same effect from putting bright flashing colors on your screen and clicking your mouse every once in a while. There's really no point to this game. It's all futile. I talked earlier about how a lot of games have to ride a line between rewarding and challenging. You need the challenge for the reward to mean something. Crimson Angel is all reward. It skips all the beginning parts, the tutorial, the quest, the leveling, the fights, everything, and just gives you the damn item. Because why not? That's why you play, right? To get the item? Well, the item means nothing if anyone can just get it by logging in and looking at some flashing lights and clicking some red buttons. I also haven't mentioned that you can spend a ridiculous amount of money on this game. Everything is purchasable with real money, and the game encourages you to do this often. Also, if the general game design wasn't enough, the game crashes very often. I played this game for a few hours, and it crashed at least 3 or 4 times. Crimson Angel is barely a video game. It's really just a bunch of animations and numbers that don't mean much of anything. It would be one thing if these numbers were something that you could grasp, systems that you could parse, things that made sense. But when there's 100 mechanics, you can't dig deep into anything. When you hit level 40 or so, you unlock a mechanic called Pool Party. I don't even fucking know what that is, but that should accurately explain how bad Crimson Angel is. Anime Girl's Highschool of Dead is a game developed by Halva Studio and was released on July 11th, 2024. It currently has mostly negative review status on Steam with 26 total reviews, 26% of those being positive. Halva Studio has also released Anime Girls Son of a Beach and The Alpha Wolf on Steam. Anime Girls is a third-person wave-based shooter that sees us defending a school from oncoming waves of zombies. We originally start with a pistol that has unlimited ammo. Gradually, over the course of the game, more ammo, new weapons, and health will spawn into the map that we can pick up. The pistol is a terrible weapon and feels awful to shoot. Most of the weapons in this game actually feel terrible to shoot. They all have a ton of kick outside of a few that don't really do much damage. The shotgun and the SMG are probably the two that I didn't mind using. The sniper has basically no advantage because outside of the trash enemies, everything takes a ton of shots to take down. Because most weapons don't really feel good, a lot of the appeal of the game is kind of gone because it isn't a great shooter. The grenade launcher should be one of the best weapons in the game, but it's really the worst. Explosion damage doesn't do nearly as much as you think it would. Launching this weapon at a pack of enemies does basically nothing to them. It might as well hit them for 1 damage. If you directly hit enemies with it, then it generally takes out the fodder in 1 hit, but the larger enemies take way more, leaving you repeatedly launching grenades at them until they fall. There are a few different types of enemies in the game. The standard slow-moving zombies can be taken out in a few hits with most weapons. In the case of the shotgun, it's 1. The faster-moving enemies are very weak and get taken out with a few shots from the pistol. The larger enemies have a few variations, but all generally take a ton of shots before going down. This is even the case with stronger weapons. Now, these are all problems, but Anime Girls High School of the Dead has some even worse problems. The first of which is that most of the walls in the game have no collision whatsoever. You can just walk right through them like it's nothing. It's strange because some walls have collision, it's not all of them. You can also shoot through these walls, but the enemies don't walk through them. They treat them like they're real. The other thing is that the stairs don't have collision either. This means that you can't access the upper areas of the school. You might think that this was planned, but it wasn't, because you can clearly see that weapons are spawning up there. This is clearly a massive oversight on the part of the developer, but why the inattention to detail? Well, what I've been trying to cover up so far is that Anime Girls is a Coomer game. Are you surprised? Couldn't you tell by the title and the general vibe? And the ladies? The starting character of the game that you play with in the beginning is very scantily clad, let's say. I won't show it on YouTube for obvious reasons, but this game is obviously baiting Coomers into buying it. And you know what I think? The Coomers deserve better. How dare you scam them like this? They're innocent paying customers, damn it. This reviewer on Steam notes that exact fact. Dear Halva Studio and Revolt Games, please enlighten me as to how the do I climb the stairs? I can see weapons, ammo, and health packs on the upper floors of the building, but whenever I try to climb the stairs, my character just phases right through them. I can forgive the ability to go through walls, but why the would you place items on the upper floors if we cannot get to them? Explain yourselves. Also, not enough eroticism, and the sniper rifle is an absolute trash. You can unlock other characters with different stats by advancing in the waves of the game. Every 5 waves you'll unlock another character, but they're pretty much just reskins with different outfits or hair. They do have different stats, which does affect the game, but it honestly doesn't matter because the game is so easy right from the get-go. None of the enemies really do much damage, and even if they did, they're just too slow to catch up to us that it would actually be very difficult to die in this game. Also, if you're ever backed into a corner, you can just walk through the wall. The game is really nothing. There's one level in a pretty bad wave shooter that's trying to attract buyers by using scantily clad women. I can't even agree with this review that says, "Fix you game, please," because even if the game was fixed, please, I wouldn't want to play it. It's a bad game, and I wouldn't even recommend it for the 99 cents that it costs. Hell, I wouldn't even recommend it if it was free. Spellcats Autocard Tactics is a game developed by Nintai Studios that was released on May 17th, 2024. It currently has mixed review status on Steam, with 25 total reviews, 56% of those being positive. The game bills itself as a roguelike card game. You are moving your way through dungeons, building up your deck of cats that interact with each other, and you pit them against other cats in these dungeons. The goal is obviously to get to the end in one run. If you die, then you start back from the beginning once again. Before I get into the problems with Spellcats, I'd like to focus on the positives. First of all, the game looks pretty great. The cards are well designed, the art style is neat, and combines pixel art with card faces that makes for a unique style. The music is actually really good, a lot of bangers in this game right off the bat. I think the game is generally pretty well designed too. It can be fun to play, and when it works, it really works. But I think the problems that I have with this game are kind of on a fundamental level. When you start Spellcats, you are given a brief tutorial and taken to a summoning screen. This screen will come directly before every battle we have in the game. At the top of the screen are 5 portals that will summon various cat cards onto your table. Each of these cards has a mana price, and we must pay this price to put them into our deck. We don't really have a deck that we draw from in Spellcats. All the cards we have are laid out on the table at the beginning of the battle in the order that we set them up in. Each card has an elemental affinity, some associated with water, others with electric, and others with stone. Each card has attack and health stats, as well as an effect that's listed below. These can come into play when destroyed, when other cards are destroyed, when they're summoned. Rebirth allows cards to be respawned when they die, Defeated takes effect when the card is destroyed in battle, and Offering only takes effect when you sacrifice the card in the shop. Overall, these are pretty standard effects seen in most card games. The roguelike element in Spellcats comes into play when we're running through the dungeon. We can choose which path we want to go down on the main map. Skulls represent battles that we'll have to take part in. Chests represent random loot that we can get, which usually has a permanent effect for the entire run. Bonfires give us a choice between mana or HP. At the end of a dungeon, we'll reach a boss, which is usually a specialized enemy or set of enemies that we'll have to face before moving on to the next area. For the most part, I think this system is pretty interesting. Getting a good build in this game makes you feel like you're on top of the world, and there's enough variety in the systems that it feels like there's always something you can do. There's a lot of synergy between cards, which creates the opportunity for a lot of different builds. But the problem with Spellcats is with the system as a whole. Before you start a battle in the game, you pick cards from the summoning pool. You can remove cards from your deck, you can switch the position of the cards on the table. The issue is that when you start the battle, you have no agency. You can't change anything at all, and this is baked into the game. It's the way that it's supposed to work. The whole game is really built around it. But the problem is that you don't really know what you're facing before you start the battle. By the time you do know what you're facing, you're already locked in and left to the whims of fate. Of course, you can try and make the best build that you can, but something could completely counter that build and you'll be defeated. There are safeguards in place. You don't automatically restart from the beginning if you lose one battle. Losing a battle just means losing a certain amount of your health pool, and then you continue moving on. So losing one battle to bad luck isn't exactly the end of the world, but it's still kind of annoying when you encounter something that just completely counters your build and you weren't ready for it. The other thing is that Spellcats is kind of clunky. I encountered what I think are a couple bugs during my playthrough. I had a really good build going and then ran into almost 3 battles in a row where the enemy was infinitely summoning 1/1 electric minions. I just couldn't even do anything and my whole deck was wiped and I lost. I don't think any of the cards had this ability, so maybe it was something that I was doing that was wrong, but it seemed like a bug. I also accidentally sacrificed one of my cards because my cursor was on the right side of the screen and I hit B to back out, but it sacrificed my card instead. There's just a few remaining problems in the game that I think could be ironed out. Even if they are ironed out though, I think the premise of the game is slightly flawed, for me at least. That being said, everything else around it is really well done. The aesthetic, the design, the imagery is all really good. If this game seems like something you'd be interested in, then I would recommend checking it out, and the developer was still updating the game as of November, so it definitely isn't some sort of cash grab and run. Again, thank you to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to play it for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, or mobile now by using my links in the pinned comment or video description below. New and returning players that haven't played in 6 months will also receive a massive bonus pack across PC and consoles, including multiple premium vehicles and other goodies. Available for a limited time only, so make sure not to miss it. With that, we've covered another 10 of the worst reviewed games on Steam. Thanks again for watching another episode of this series. I love talking about bad and some good games. If you have any poorly reviewed games that you'd like me to talk about in the next episode, be sure to leave them in the comments below. I always try to check out the games that people recommend me. Huge shout out to anyone that supports me over on Patreon. All of you are fantastic and I really appreciate your support. If you'd like to support me on Patreon, I offer updates every so often, early access to my videos, and some extra content from time to time. The link is in the description below. Thanks again for watching and I'll see you next time. Bye now.